You are probably here because you really want to learn more about learning for life and all these different life skills, transferable skills, whatever words we have, that Dave is going to talk about in a minute. So welcome officially to everyone who's joining us live in the webinar or on Facebook Live. And I've got a few things I want to tell you about before I'm going to hand you over to my lovely colleague and excellent inspirational speaker, Dave. So let me check a few things with you. There's a pre-task as well that you should have received before today's session. So we're actually wondering, have you done the pre-task? Have you looked at that document that you received in your email with some ideas to get you thinking about what Dave's going to talk about? Let's see, Dave, what we see. Haven't noticed. Oh, Monica, not yet. Oh, some people have. Sure, Natalia, lovely. That's good to hear, isn't it?
That's good. Yes, definitely. Yes, of course, not obligatory, but I think you probably didn't need to be sent the pre-task, right? When you registered, I think, and in fact, even now, if anybody's interested, if you go to the Teach with Dave website, you can actually download the pre-task there. And you might find it useful even as you're following this talk now. So.
And the pre-task, of course, it's not something you have to do, as Dave said. It's more to activate your thinking on the topic. It's actually the same what we do with our students in the classroom, right? It's good practice, get them thinking before we teach. So then the things that we talk about in that lesson are more noticed by our students, and often they stick a little bit better in their brain as well. Don't worry if you haven't done it, no issues at all. What I do want to tell you, it is today after the session, you will get a post task as well. Now, you're not going to receive the post task today because there's lots of other things you have to do, but in an email next week, you will find that post task. If you've joined us in previous sessions, you know a little bit what it's like. There's some material for you on the handout to reflect on Dave's session and his ideas today. There's a chance to consolidate those ideas and put them into practice in your own teaching. And there also will be an amazing activity, a quiz for your students that you can do in the last days of class if you want to. Then, of course, you will also get our last podcast. Now, it'll be quite interesting to find out who of you have already listened to the previous podcasts. Let's have a look then in the chat box if anyone has actually listened to us, Dave.
Yes, I noticed that Mariam, I think, said yes. Mariam mentioned that she had.
Lovely. The first one, Marcella, thank you. All of them. Oh, that's nice, Nino. So again, not something you have to do, but what we wanted to do with the Teach with Dave series was more than just one webinar. So you can choose if you just want to attend, if you want to prepare yourself, if you want to consolidate it, absolutely up to you. And you will get all the details of all these tasks in the email. In that email, you will also get a recording of today's session, and you will get the slides Dave is using today. So don't think you need to take notes and stress. Enjoy the session, be active in that chat box, and then you can look at the slides later. Now, again, you will get all of this in an email. So please check your inbox with the address you've registered with. And in that email you'll get late next week, there will also be a link for you to get your certificates. Yeah, so make sure you check that email address. If it's not your email address, but your friends, get them to check it for you as well. Yeah? And there's one more thing I like to say. The session is being recorded, so please don't share any private details in that chat box. Good. Now, I don't know if I've got anything else to say. I actually think I've said everything I had to. I mean, yes. Are you ready to start the session, Dave?
Definitely. I think it's a good idea. Let's begin.
Because that's what everyone is here for. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Dave and enjoy the session. See you later.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you, everybody. Really, I'm incredibly happy that so many people have joined me today. I know that for many people, you've just told me that it's the end of your school year, as it is for me. The summer is beginning, for me at least, and it's so great to see so many people. It's just amazing how many people are here today, and literally, again, from all over the world. So let's begin the talk. If you've been following the previous masterclass sessions, just to let you know, of course, the first session that I was explaining was all about basically classroom management and motivating teenagers. In the second session, I was concentrating on exam preparation, which I think is a really important thing for teenagers, so they're ready for their school leaving exams, for external exams. And as I explained in that session, basically teenagers face a life of tests, a life of exams. And this session today is all about preparing students for the tests of life. I think it's true that I've been teaching teenagers now for about 30 years or more. And I think particularly in the last 10 years, there have been some really interesting developments in the teaching of teenagers. And I think there are some particularly good reasons why education, particularly secondary education, has been changing in the last 10, 15 years. What I want to do in this session is look at some of the shifts that have happened in the last, for example, 5, 10, 15 years, look at where we can find out more information about those shifts in education, and then obviously concentrate particularly on how those changes have brought changes to the teaching of English as a foreign or second language. So let's begin by looking at some of the recent shifts in the educational needs of teenagers. And Anna was mentioning the pre-tasks. One of the pre-tasks was asking about whether you felt that school, how well did school prepare you for life after school? And there was a scale from 0 to 10. 0 would be really badly and 10 would be really well. Could you just give me a number from 0 to 10? How well did school prepare you for life after school? Okay, thank you. That's really fast. 5, 7, 6, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Now, well, that's a pretty high number. Take it to the top. 7, 6, 5, 8. Right, so massive differences. I think this question is a really interesting question. Do teenagers today feel that school is preparing them for life after school? I would say that today, I would like to think that today, most schools are getting better at preparing teenagers for life after school, but I'm not really sure. Why don't you ask your students tomorrow to do exactly the same, to give you a number between 0 and 10? One thing that I would definitely say is that when I went to school, many things were useful for life after school, but only very indirectly. Maybe we spent a lot of time studying medieval history. Maybe we spent a long time reading and learning Latin. And those things I think can be useful, but I would say they are only indirectly useful. And I believe that today, in the 21st century, there is a need for schools to respond so that they really do prepare teenage students for life after school. So I think teenagers themselves, and as I say, ask them tomorrow, teenagers themselves may feel that school needs to prepare them better, more directly for the challenges of life in the 21st century. Now, there are other groups of people in society, I believe, that also feel that school isn't preparing secondary students for life after school. These are some newspaper reports, fairly recent, 2017, 2016. We've got universities claiming that students are not being prepared enough for higher education. You can see the main headline there in the middle. Millennials aren't ready for the reality of college life and can't manage time or money. So that's a question then. Is our job then to make sure that students are ready for the realities of college life? Is there anything that we can do as teachers to help them to prepare to manage their time? I would say yes, we can. Manage their money? Possibly yes, too. In other words, certain life skills that we can prepare our students to do. Now, it's not only teenagers and universities who may feel that school is not preparing for life after school. Many businesses and companies also feel that we do not do a good job at preparing teenagers for the world of work. I'd like you to look at the center of the screen where it says 88%. 88% of firms believe school believers are not prepared for work. And if you can see 57%, it says 57% believe that students lack soft skills such as communication, team working, and resilience. And the point then would be, and there are lots of questions. I noticed somebody sort of like, I noticed somebody saying, preparing students, is it right that schools have to prepare for higher education? Is it right that schools have to prepare for the world of work? I think these are interesting questions, and they're certainly not black or white. But I think it's interesting that many social agents feel that school is not doing its job. Whether we agree or disagree, I think it's important and interesting to listen to what others are saying. I think there are also many educational experts who believe that school should be different in the 21st century than in the 20th century or even in the 19th century. And we could, simplifying, we could make two different models of education. Progressive education on one side, traditional education on the other side. And I'm going to ask you a very tricky question in a second, but you can see that traditional means memorizing facts, retaining knowledge, treating students as empty receptacles. So that means that a student comes to us and they are empty, and we simply fill them with knowledge. We fill them with information. And some people could argue that this is superficial. It's only surface learning. Whereas many educational experts today would argue that we need a more progressive approach to education, where we encourage students to question what we're doing, where we ask students to be active participants in their learning. They're not simply there to listen to us giving them information. They're there to think deeper. They're there to question. They're there to explore with us. So they are not simply passive, they are active, active participants in the learning process. Now, I say that, but actually I'd like to ask you a quick question. For example, in Spain, where I teach, often things like history are a question of memorizing facts rather than questioning what happened. Can you tell me very quickly, in your country, would you say, if you had to choose one, would you say that your country is more progressive or more traditional? Progressive we've got, traditional, both, progressive, both, traditional, right. I mean, I think it is very interesting that I think many education systems around the world tend to still ask for lots of memorization. We talked about exams last week. In many subjects, maybe less so in English, but students are asked to simply remember facts. And I think we would agree that as teachers, it's nice to have an education system where students are actively involved in the learning process. Now, apart from all of these reasons for educational shifts in the 21st century, I think another really important and a more recent shift in education is this whole terrible feeling that things are pretty bad in the 21st century. I found this very quickly searching on online, look at all of these headlines. They're so depressing. But I think generally people are worried, right, about the situation of the world. Their top headline, January the 13th, 2021, worried about Earth's future. The outlook is worse than even scientists can grasp. Okay, if you look at the bottom left, coronavirus is only one of 10 catastrophic threats facing humans right now. Next to it, unprecedented energy use since 1950 has transformed humanity's geologic footprint. And I believe that right now, 21st century, schools are also joining this feeling that we need to react, to educate students to be global citizens. We talk about global citizenship. We talk about sustainability. And I think that, you know, this whole question is a really interesting question. Education of primary and secondary students is certainly beginning to look at the whole question of sustainability with a clear idea to improve life for the future. So I'm going to give you a list now of groups, organizations which have reacted to these new educational needs. And this is very important. At the end of this session, remember, first of all, you will get a PDF of these slides, so you don't need to make notes. But also at the end of this talk, you will get a list of further reading, okay, where you can find out much more about all of the things that I'm going to mention really quite quickly now, okay? But I thought these trends would be useful for you to know about. In the United Kingdom, there is now a subject called PSHE education, personal, social, health and economic education. And the idea of this subject is precisely to prepare students for life outside school, preparing them for healthy eating, exercise, psychological well-being, looking after money, creating their own budgets. So that's really interesting. I think that this whole subject is all about teaching these life skills. At the same time, in Europe, the European Commission for Education has explored the concept of key competences. The idea is that students do not just need to know chemistry, biology, history, English, science. They also need to know about digital skills, literary skills, numeracy skills, citizenship, entrepreneurship. And so the idea of the European Commission for Education is that they are also preparing students for life outside of school. Remember, you'll get references to explore these areas in much more detail if you are interested. Social and emotional learning, that's another area. So we're talking about student well-being. There are organizations like the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning, which have prepared lots of materials. We'll see their definitions of social and emotional learning. So this organization, very 21st century concept, preparing students for mental well-being, for mindfulness, for being healthy psychologically, not just physically. Edutopia is an educational fund. I think it's funded by George Lucas from Star Wars, and they also spend a lot of time looking at the preparation of social and emotional learning. By the way, from time to time, I can see possibly some questions. I will try and come back to your questions. If I can, at the end of the session, we're going to do a Q&A session, and just remind me of your questions towards the end. Also, we've got PISA, which I'm sure many of you know about. They test students around the world, seeing how well school is teaching, for example, maths and language. But they're also now looking into creative thinking. And again, I think this is a really interesting area that now educational specialists are looking at about thinking skills. Okay. And then we've got the Harvard Graduate School of Education. This is fascinating. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but practices, activities that can get your students thinking in a deeper way and exploring concepts and exploring them critically. And then I think the last two are really recent developments. We've got UNESCO Global Citizenship Education. That's well worth exploring if you're interested in the whole question about citizenship, about treating the world as one world, and thinking about how we can prepare students to create a better world, if you like. And certainly now, if you don't know about this now, you're going to know about it in the next 5-6 months, because the United Nations 2030 agenda is coming really into force in schools. Where I teach in Spain, it's becoming a big, big thing. In Italy, I know it already is a big thing, and you can find it in the Italian edition of Gateway to Success. We have lots of information about the Sustainable Development Goals. Can you just put in the chat box if you know about these Sustainable Development Goals? Can you just put yes or no? Okay, there's a mixture. Right, this is really interesting. If you don't know about it already, you will know about it very soon. There are these 17 goals to transform our world. You will see that number 4 is quality education for everybody in every country. But we've got lots of other topics which we'll look at how we can explore these in the English language classroom. If you look, we've got responsible consumption and production. We've got gender equality. We've got climate action. And we've got things like partnership for all of these 17, 16 goals. So I think that all of these areas I mentioned before, the world is in a pretty negative place at the moment. And I think that education now is looking at these 17 goals and thinking about how we can include them in teaching and in schools. Okay. Now, everything that I've talked about so far is true for general education. The question now is how we can include, how these things are entering into the world of English language teaching. And I would say there are 4 main areas. I think we've got the first one, life skills. The second thing I think is thinking skills. The third thing is social and emotional learning. And the fourth thing is global citizenship. And these things are all, I think, filtering into our world as teachers of English. Now, what I'd like you to do just for a second, have a quick think. I'm not going to give you much time to think. But for example, Marina has said make projects. And my next question is, how could we incorporate these 4 things into our English language lessons? Would anybody like to sort of make suggestions there? Susanna's saying making dilemmas. Roundtable discussion, that's a nice idea. Maria. Group projects, definitely. Debates, absolutely. Role dialogue, so role playing, yes. Team or group work, definitely. And actually, team or group work is really an example of citizenship, isn't it? Working together. Infographics, meetings, simulations, projects. Right, yes. A very good point about good course books. Obviously, the way that I've tried to incorporate these things is into my books, whether it's Gateway or the new course Gateway to the World or Great Thinkers in Spain, but including these things in our books. Right, I'm going to show you how I believe we can easily, and I do say the word easily, I think all of the things that we've talked about can be easily incorporated into classes for teenagers learning English in these particular ways, amongst others. So I think that we can use them to create really interesting reading texts, interesting listening texts. So instead of talking about maybe Taylor Swift in the lesson, we could be talking about, for example, the question of ethical shopping, for example. We can be talking about climate change. We can be talking about how to study more effectively. So we can use these topics as the basis for our texts. Also, as some of you have suggested, we can use these topics for speaking activities, for debates, for role plays, for discussions, for project work, as somebody said also. So we can basically incorporate them very easily simply by making them the basis for our discussions. Video lessons too. Yes, thank you very much. That's an excellent idea. And as you've mentioned, yes, here, Maria, they're so true to life. So we're, in a way, I always feel that life skills, global citizenship, are actually helping us. Instead of making our lives more difficult, they're helping us by giving us meaningful input, meaningful topics to talk about. Then we can also incorporate these things by simply encouraging students to think creatively and critically. And I think that's something that teachers, we generally do. We get students to think about the topics deeper. We can also, I believe, simply encourage respect and collaboration in the classroom. Somebody mentioned before the importance of pair work and group work, which is very typical in English classrooms. And so I think that the whole area there is encouraging our students to be collaborative and respectful young adults. And finally, I think that one way that we can simply, very simply, encourage respect, tolerance, and thought in the classroom is by being good role models ourselves. So I think these 5 main areas are the simplest way to simply encourage a change in our teaching. Now, the first thing I want to look at, and I'm going to give you some examples. Many of the examples are taken from my latest course, Gateway to the World, Great Thinkers. Sometimes we can get confused by the terminology. Life skills is the term that I usually use. We could also call them 21st century skills. We can call them global skills because they encompass many different areas. Soft skills and also transferable skills. Let me just explain. Yes, survival skills also, Carmen. Yeah, transferable skills. Transferable skills particularly refers to skills that we can use, for example, not just in one job, but in many jobs. So, for example, if you are a computer programmer, maybe you need to learn coding. Coding would be like a hard skill which you need for one particular job. But there are other skills, life skills, which are useful in any job. I'm going to give you one example, and then I'd like you to, in the chat box, suggest other examples. One example of a transferable skill is communicative skills, because in any job, you need to be able to communicate successfully. Okay, so being able to communicate is not just important when you're computer programming, right? Other ideas, yeah? Group work, yes, exactly. Teamwork. Empathy, definitely. We'll look at empathy later. IT skills, absolutely. Writing a cover letter is, yes, definitely. You need that for any job. Yeah, decision making, definitely. Also, problem solving is a really, really important skill, definitely. Problem solving coming up a lot. Yeah, being willing to share your knowledge, definitely. Yes. Negotiating, right, and creativity, right. So these are all great ideas, thinking outside the box and problem solving. So this is an example from Gateway to the World, Great Thinkers, and I'll show you the text closer up. You've already mentioned many of these transferable skills, but being, for example, being patient, being well organized, being responsible. We've mentioned problem solving, being ambitious, okay, being inquiring. Mathematical skills are useful, of course, in any job. Dexterity, being good with your hands, and then we've got communication skills, leadership, and teamwork. So I think it's a good idea to get students to think about what skills are useful in jobs, and then getting them to, for example, rank according to their own personality. Which skills do they think that they are good at, and which skills do they think they need to develop further? Yes, Amir, you've just mentioned one of my favorite words, resilience, absolutely. So all of those transferable skills, get students to think about what those skills are, and then get students to think about what their strong points are and what they need to work on more. And also to think about any jobs they think they might be interested in the future and how they can develop those skills. Now, here are just some more ideas to get you thinking about topics that you could use in your own lessons, okay? These are topics that I used as a basis for the syllabus for life skills in Gateway 2nd edition, Gateway to the World, Great Thinkers. And I think you would probably agree that most of those are really useful skills. Somebody's mentioned, yeah, Nazi has mentioned that they're great for adults too. And that's one point that I'd like to make. I believe that's a good sign that these life skills are useful, because quite frankly, they're useful when you're a secondary student, and they are also useful for you as adults. So what I would suggest to you when you get your PDF, you can use this as a basis for preparing some lessons yourself. What are you most interested in? What are you concerned about in your students? How could you help them to prepare for life better? And the great thing is, we can talk about all of these topics in English. By the way, I did mention that somebody, I did notice that somebody mentioned about levels. It is true, obviously, the higher the level, the better they can discuss these things. But I do think these are also possible at lower levels, at least in terms of input. Andro, that looks like a really interesting point. Can you bring that up again at the end of the session for me, please? Because that is a very good question, and I'd like to answer it in more detail. So, simple interesting areas that you could discuss and investigate in your classes. Now, I mentioned before as well, I think a really, really vital skill in the 21st century is thinking skills, okay? Now, here's a little bit of a joke for you, okay? So I've got this picture here. Teacher, you opened my eyes to the world, and you showed me how to question things and think critically. I was happy until I met you. Has anybody ever had this reaction in their lessons? This is a joke, by the way. Yes, I'm glad that Nazi is laughing. Yeah. I mean, I think it's true, right? I mean, when you're a primary student and when you're a secondary student, you know, it's much easier in life when you believe in Father Christmas and you believe in the Tooth Fairy. You don't really need to question things. Maybe when you're a primary student, life is generally black and white. But I think that as you get older, life becomes very grey. And although it's much nicer to be innocent and to simply have black and white decisions, I think it's useful as educators that we get students used to thinking critically and used to exploring their ideas. And right, that's a very good point. Maria's mentioned about circuses, right? So when you're young, a circus is a great thing, right? Even a zoo is a great thing. But as you get older, there are questions about circuses and zoos, right? So yes, it's interesting. Now, for me, if you look at the critical thinkers box, this is taken from Gateway to the World, Great Thinkers. If you look at the critical thinkers box, this is my recommendation for all questions for critical thinking. Can you see in green? It says, what makes you say that? What makes you say that? That's a great question. I love this question now. When we ask their students' opinion, they can say, well, that's stupid, or that's good, or that's great, but then they don't go much further. What we need to do is to get students going deeper. Okay, so you think this question is about, should school start later to allow teenage students to sleep more? Now, I don't really care if my students say yes or no. What I care is that they have a good argument for their opinion. They're not just saying yes or no, they're saying yes because. You notice that it's saying use ideas in the text, other facts, other opinions, other experiences to justify your opinion. Now, Nazi said exactly that, justify, exactly, Susanna. The question is justifying, okay? Now, It's a bit like circuses. Are circuses good or bad? Well, you know, you can have your opinion, but justify your opinion. And I think I mentioned this in the second masterclass. In exams, students now are expected to justify their opinions. They can have any opinion is valid as long as they justify it. So my recommendation for you is to ask that question. What makes you say that? When your student comes out with, well, I think, you know, dogs are the best pets in the world, what makes you say that? Give me a reason, okay? Now, Maria's saying that, yeah, even adults in many cases have nothing to say. That's why we need to encourage teenagers at a teenage, you know, at their age as adolescents, to start getting into the habit of being able to think deeper. And I think that it's worth trying, worth persisting. Now, I'm going to show you a few other ideas. These are all ideas that you can use, particularly, for example, for comprehension exercises. Think, question, explore, okay? This is a great activity for beginning just before you do a reading text, a listening text, or before you watch a video. So you explain the topic and you say, what do you think you know about this topic? Okay, so the think, what do you think you know about this topic? The second point, what questions do you have about this topic? So what would you like to know? Okay, so we're going from the starting point is, what do you think you know? What more would you like to know? And then the third thing is, how could you explore to find out the answers to your questions? So I think these are great routines, getting your students, as somebody said, adults often don't do this. So let's get students into the routine of thinking as they are growing up. What do you think you know about the topic? What questions do you have about the topic? And how could you explore the topic in greater detail? Okay, and another thinking routine, here's another one, sentence, phrase, word. This is much more useful. The other one was pre-reading. This would be while or after reading or looking at videos or listening. So sentence, phrase, word. So choose one sentence from the text or from the video that you think talks about a key point. Choose one phrase from the video that moved you, that interested you, or that provoked you. So maybe it's something that they didn't like, but it's a phrase that created a personal reaction in them. And then also choose one word from the video or from the text that you think was central to the idea of the text or of the video. So I think that's a lovely comprehension exercise, isn't it? We're not just doing multiple choice here, we're getting to the heart of a text. Choose a sentence, choose a phrase, choose a word. And we're also getting a personal reaction, which I think is really interesting. Sentence, phrase, word. You can do this with any text, any single text that you use with your students. And one final thinking routine, which is going to take us on to social and emotional learning, okay? But this idea is the circle of viewpoints. Now, actually, I love doing this activity after doing a reader in class. You know, you have a reader where you've got three main characters. What you do next is you ask students to work in small groups. Each person is one of the main characters, and they have to think about the situation from their viewpoint, and then they role play this. So you can do this with any text where you've got 2 or 3, 4 main characters. And I think it's a really great way to get students looking at the same facts, but from a different viewpoint. And as I say, any text which has 3 or 4 characters, any story which has 3 or 4 characters, we can use to do this. And I'm showing this activity because this takes me as a bridge into my third area, which is social and emotional learning. So social and emotional learning, somebody mentioned before the whole question of empathy, and that's what we've just done in the last activity. Social and emotional learning, I gave a webinar about this topic earlier this year that you might like to watch if you're interested in particular in this area. But the whole idea of social and emotional learning is the idea that students, teenage students here, but as many of you are saying, many of these activities are really useful also for adults. Social and emotional learning is about being able to understand and manage your emotions. And if you can do that, that means that you are able to understand other people better too. And that can help you to manage other people, to get on with them better. So here in this area, we're looking particularly at the idea of collaboration, working together. Yes, searching inside yourself. Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Now, I mentioned this collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning framework. Can I ask, have you ever seen this wheel before? Because this is one of the most frequent images that people use to talk about social and emotional learning. Right, well, remember, you're going to get the PDF of this talk, and you can explore this wheel in a lot more detail. The 5 main areas that Castle has described for social and emotional learning is self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And I believe that these things are particularly useful for teenage students. Teenage students are working out how to cope in secondary school. They're working out how to learn better. Secondary school, in many ways, is a bridge between primary school and university. Now, I'd like you to think about one particular skill that is really useful for all students, and that is setting objectives and setting goals. And I'd like you in the chat box, could you possibly think of any reasons why you personally think that setting goals or setting objectives can be a really positive thing for students to do? How can it help you if you set yourself goals in your studies? Could you just put in the chat box any ideas you have? Yes, exactly. Great ideas. By the way, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you all for so much participation. I never feel alone in a webinar with you people because you're always answering everything I ask you all the time. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Exactly. You can see the results. You're motivated. That's a great point. I couldn't see your name, sorry, but you can reach a goal only if you have one. That's a great way of explaining it, definitely. Yeah, so if you have a goal, you can achieve your goal. If you don't have a goal, you don't know where you are going. And I think that's a great way of thinking about it, isn't it? And our job then as teachers is to help our students to set goals. I hope you can read in the corner there. It's maybe not incredibly big, but we've got those importance of setting goals for young people. It develops focus and concentration. It gives you confidence. And I think we feel happier. When we've got a goal, we feel less worried. We feel less anxious because we know what we're doing. We know where we're going. So it gives you confidence. It makes you more optimistic. I think, as some of you have said, it helps you to work harder because it gives you a sense of purpose. Yeah. And I think finally, the last point there, it teaches you responsibility. So once you have your own goals, you are responsible for what you are doing in your studies. So we're talking about confidence, we're talking about optimism, we're talking about feeling happy, we're talking about well-being. So the whole area of social and emotional learning is about all of these things, simply feeling better about yourself, particularly in the area, of course, of your studies. One thing that I think this leads us to is collaboration, and you can see that this is a collaborative project, really getting students to work together, and it's actually getting them to work together about comparing their country with another country. And I'm sure some of you have heard about the whole question of mediation, but we're also sort of very interested in the whole area there of students getting used to thinking about other cultures, not other cultures that they are weird, but the other cultures, how are they similar? How are they different? And why might they be different? So instead of thinking that other people are weird, let's get students, particularly teenage students, thinking about that the interesting thing are the differences between us. They're not strange, they're actually interesting. So preparing projects where students are then collaborating. And by the way, this next slide is really important, because if we are going to teach collaboration, we also need to teach the language to collaborate. So things like, that's a good idea, what do you think, I see what you mean. And somebody did mention before the importance of lower levels. Lower levels, we have to make sure that they've got this functional language so they can try to do this as well as possible in their in the target language. And as Camila has mentioned, intercultural competence. It's really important, getting students to think about differences, but getting them to bridge those differences. Which really takes me on again to my next slide, which is again, great learners. What are great learners? Well, great learners are people who show solidarity with others. And great learners are students who think globally and act locally. And that takes me on to my last large area, which is the area that I mentioned before about global citizenship. And I think, personally, I think in the next year, as I've already mentioned, this area of teaching is going to become one of the biggest and most important areas in secondary teaching, and certainly also in primary teaching. Now, the world is changing, and unfortunately, some people might think it's changing for the worst, but there are lots of positive things that are happening too. And to reflect these changes, English as a language is also changing. I've got 3 new words in English. Can you just tell me if you know what any, have you seen these words? Do you know what any of them mean? Do you know what upcycling is, or flexitarianism, or plogging? Somebody said they know what plogging is. What's plogging? Would somebody like to share their knowledge? Collecting rubbish while running. Thank you, Adriana. Perfect, yeah. So these words, new words in English, and they're all connected with the environment and with lifestyle, okay? Plogging is a question of running and picking up rubbish at the same time, which is a great idea. Flexitarianism is, so it's not the same as a vegetarian, because a flexitarian is flexible and will eat meat, but they won't necessarily eat much meat, okay? So they will eat some meat, but they'll eat less meat, and that is good for the environment. And finally, upcycling. Upcycling is the same as recycling, but it's taking an old product and making it better than it was before. It's not just using it again, it is improving it. And in this lesson, we actually explore in a video a shopping center in, I think it's in Sweden, where everything they sell is upcycled, okay? So they take rubbish and make it into something better. And really, the whole of this lesson brings together many of the themes that I've talked about. The students watch the video and then they read about it, so they think about it. I mentioned this routine before. What do you think you know about the topic, for example, of upcycling? What questions or puzzles do you have? And read the text, explore it, and where could you find more information? Okay, so we're getting students to think in a systematic, guided way about the question of sustainability. Then we get students to read about ethical shopping, and then we get them to make connections with their lives. So, are you an ethical shopper? Do you only buy things that you need? What else do you buy? Do you know where the things that you buy, where they came from, if they were produced fairly? Okay, so all of these questions are getting the students to think about this topic in a systematic way. Ethical shopping, if you get a chance, when you see the PDF, you'll be able to read the text and learn something interesting about second-hand shopping, fair trade, all of those questions. And then the whole question there is getting students to think about the importance of solidarity, about how the effects of what you do in one country can have a real effect on other countries. Okay, now I'm coming to the end of my session, and then we'll have a question and answer session, and I know that there are lots of questions out there. I'm sure that you're thinking that this is quite interesting, but you might have some criticisms of all of the things that I've said. Here's one criticism in the form of a joke, okay? I'm going to show you this joke. And so, children, more than to teach, school is to open your minds to the search for information, to stimulate your curiosity, to encourage your question for answers. Are there any questions? And I think you can guess what's going to happen. Right, that's quite a nice joke, isn't it? And I think somebody mentioned this before, that adults don't do this either. We can have our goal to make students question, think. We talked about progressive education, traditional education. Students may be happier, as we said before, they may be happier not thinking critically. It's very nice simply to accept what people tell you. But we do need to encourage our students to think, even if they don't want to, okay? And so what I've explained to you so far, I don't think it's a magic solution. I don't think students will automatically embrace the idea of critical thinking, for example, but I think it's our job as educators to get them into the, at least into the routine of beginning to think. Another criticism of life skills, for example, could be that you're an English teacher and you should be teaching grammar, vocabulary, and the 4 skills. And also that we don't have much time because we're teaching for exams. I think also, though, it's very important to remember, firstly, I don't think that grammar teaching and teaching life skills or global citizenship are mutually exclusive. I hope I've convinced you that we can do these things together. We can get students to learn English, but at the same time learn about the world. Those things are not in contrast or in conflict. I honestly believe that those two things go together. Okay, so in my view, that teaching life skills does not mean that we don't teach grammar. And for me as a teacher, I spend a long, long time teaching grammar and vocabulary, but not exclusively. Okay, now, can I ask a question? Did anybody see my first masterclass? And did anybody see, this was the very first slide in my very first session. Does anybody remember who said this quotation? Children nowadays just love the easy life, they're bad-mannered, show contempt for authority. Does anybody remember who said it? Yes, Tatiana was it maybe, I think. Socrates, it was Socrates, okay? Socrates, thank you, so you were paying attention, okay? Now, I think that this is, I began saying that this is proof that teenagers have always been teenagers. But it is true that we have stereotypical ideas, I think, about teenagers and about old people, and this lesson is questioning ageism. Should we have negative stereotypes about old people and young people? Now, Socrates had these negative stereotypes about teenagers. He said they were bad-mannered, contemptuous, disrespectful, and frivolous, okay? But what I'd like to do to finish this session is for us to think about positive qualities that we can see every day with our teenagers. So teenagers, I don't think that everything about teenagers is negative. Creative, exactly. Ambitious, funny, open-minded, enthusiastic, eager to learn new things, persistent, spontaneous. I love spontaneity in my teenage students, definitely. Reflective, highly motivated, free. You know what? I think I'm going to try and make a list. I'm going to look back at this seminar and I'm going to make a list of your adjectives, and we're going to complete this table with all of the great things that you're saying. In other words, it is true that teenagers can be bad-mannered and they can be disrespectful. But I believe, and the reason why I love teaching teenagers is because they have so many positive qualities, so much energy. So I'm going to finish my session, finish my masterclasses with 3 important quotations, okay? The first one is from Johnny Rotten. If anybody remembers the Sex Pistols, Johnny Lydon, and he says, listen, you know this. If there's not rebellious youth culture, there's no culture at all. It's absolutely essential. It is the future. This is what we're supposed to do as a species, is advance ideas. And I really do believe that teenagers, with their energy, their creativity, their spontaneity, they do bring new things. And, you know, the reason that civilization is still going today is because teenagers bring a lot to the plate, to the table. And the reason that I love teaching still is because of that spontaneity, creativity, enthusiasm. You know, sometimes they're not enthusiastic, but they do have energy. My second quotation is from a Nobel Prize winner. And he says, Kailash Satyarthi, the power of youth is the commonwealth of the entire world. The faces of young people are the faces of our past, our present, and our future. No segment in society can match with the power, idealism, enthusiasm, and courage of young people. What a great quotation, right, from a Nobel Prize winner. And again, I agree with all of that. Power, idealism, enthusiasm, courage. Again, these are reasons why I still love being a teacher of teenagers 30, 35 years after I began. And my final quotation is going back to Greek philosophers, Diogenes. The foundation of every state is the education of its youth. And that is why, my friends, we are doing maybe one of the most important jobs in the world. By being teachers of teenagers, I think that we really are creating the future. Teachers create the future, right? Our students are the future. They will be in charge of climate change. They will be in charge of politics. They'll be in charge of everything. So let's teach them the best that we can now so that we help to create a powerful and good future. Okay, these are the sources that I've used. They will appear in the PDF. You'll also get, I think, in your post task, you'll get a link to these also. So if you want to explore any of these areas more, you are free to do so, and I encourage you to do so. And that is the end, apart from any questions that you might have. Thanks, by the way, for all your participation. It's just great to see so many people answering all of my questions all the time. Thanks for the kind words. They're powerful, aren't they? Powerful quotes, I think.
Teenagers, I don't know, I'm a primary school teacher. I always have immense respect for you teachers of teenagers. And lovely. Lots of love in that chat box for you as well, which is fabulous to see.
Thank you very much. I think I honestly believe that, you know, with teenagers, we've got that. It's like the Jekyll and Hyde thing that, you know, there are sometimes people have negative ideas because of, you know, bad behavior and stuff like that sometimes. But when you capture the energy, when you capture the, you know, the creativity that they have, I think it's, you know, it's such a great profession. I think we're lucky to be teaching teenagers. So have we got?
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? But once you get them on your side, it's probably one of the most rewarding jobs as well, because you can see them develop in their thinking and behavior.
Absolutely, yes. Oh, there was a quick question there about role models, I think. So I'm not sure if I caught it.
There's loads of questions for you. Do you have time for some questions?
Definitely, yeah, of course.
Fabulous. Yeah. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone as well to putting your questions in the chat box and being so active. That always makes it a lot more pleasant for us to sit here in our rooms alone. So many questions, and I had to select quite a few. And I think one that was really interesting and probably valid for a lot of us. If you teach a lower level, language level group of teenagers, how can we actually develop these thinking skills and life skills if they don't have so much language yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are different things. Obviously, with life skills, really, what I'm sort of suggesting, I suppose, with life skills is that we do use them as the basis for texts, for example, reading texts, listening texts. So really, I suppose the point would be it's the same as any text for example, A2. How do you make it easy enough for students to understand? I think you can make the English easy and still maintain interesting content. And actually, I think that's really important. You know, when I started teaching books for A2 level, because the level of English was low, the level of content was sometimes extremely low too. And I don't believe that's necessary. You can have simple English, but really important and interesting content. Obviously, students don't have the language to discuss it in as much detail. So I think we've got two things, receptive and productive. So I think the receptive is really not difficult. And with productive, it's like anything that we're teaching, they'll come to the level that they have. If they're only going to be able to say simple things, then let them say simple things. What you might decide is if that you're talking about something really deep and meaningful and they feel a bit frustrated, then I think from time to time, maybe letting them go into their own language. Personally, I know that some people don't like that. Personally, I'm happy to let students do that. I'm happy to let students, you know, if they really want something to say something deep, let them say it in their own language from time to time.
I was just going to ask that question as well, Dave, because as a primary school teacher, when we work with children, even in New Zealand, some of the kids don't have English as their first language. If it's about the concept, it's okay to go back to L1 and then report together in English again. So yeah. Lovely that we can do.
I think also the thinking skills question is slightly different, but I think that the thinking routines that we've chosen, for example, in Gateway to the World, the new course that I've been showing you examples from, we've chosen routines that are the good thing about the thinking, visible thinking, is that it's very concrete. It's not abstract, it's very concrete. So it's read this, do this, choose one sentence. And that's pretty easy to understand even at a lower level. There's one question that somebody asked about the teaching education system, and they've asked me a few times, and they've reminded me. I'm just wondering do you have that written down? Or
I have. I think it was Andro's question about the main problem is that decisions regarding education systems are made by people who've never taught in schools.
Yeah, and Aldo, I think it was Aldo, right? And you've asked that a few times. I think that's a really good question, and I think, Andrew, I think that's I don't have an answer for that, but I completely share your frustration. I think it's so typical in so many countries that the people who are in charge, not always, okay, but I think sometimes people don't realize, and it is very frustrating. Having said that, I think with things like global citizenship and with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, I think that more and more countries are now coming to the conclusion that it's like climate change. I think now even educational ministries are deciding that we have to do something about this, even at school. So I think that some of the changes that I've been talking about are actually gradually coming into educational systems. But yeah, I share your frustration. And, I think that how many ministries of education around the world would be better if they involved teachers more in the decisions that they make, right? Grassroots teachers, it would be so important for us to get some sort of, involvement. Andrew, yes, positive changes are taking place. I agree. And not enough, yeah. And I share your frustration. But I think gradually things are happening, and maybe people are beginning to listen to teachers more. I would like to think. I hope. I'm going to be optimistic.
That's always good to be optimistic, right? I'm going to continue on that train of thought, Dave. So what we also see happening is that schools or ministries are integrating these programs into our daily curriculum. But some of us teachers might not be so familiar with social emotional learning or developing thinking skills. So how can we train ourselves? How can we develop this so we can actually become better teachers of these life skills?
Yeah, I think I'm going to say something terrible here, but I think that one of the best ways that we can all learn more is sometimes just by choosing a good course book. Because I think the practical changes that we make in our classroom often come from the material that we use. If you use material that incorporates these ideas in a practical way, I think that they'll come naturally. They'll just come into your classes in a very natural way. So have a look at your book, have a look at your course book. What are you using? Does it incorporate any of these elements? Does it incorporate them in a sort of practical, easy to use way? Because I think that once the book incorporates these things naturally, realistically, then I think they're pretty easy to teach. And apart from that, as I said, follow some of those sources that I've given, and really just, I suppose, teacher development often is a question of researching these things yourself. Find out what you're interested in, and most of those websites that I've suggested, they do have practical teaching materials too. So yeah, you can hopefully use those ideas also.
Yeah, they have fabulous practical resources for us teachers to download and use, actually.
That's right.
And I think as well, I mean, I'm going to promote Macmillan here, of course. There's lots of webinars in the Macmillan archive that you have done on social emotional learning, this global citizenship skills. So I think Nazi said CPD, continuous professional development. So research for yourself as a teacher. And yeah.
Yes, and obviously, that's right. And the idea of this session in particular, more so than with the previous 2 masterclasses, was really sort of, just sort of sending out these ideas and sources for you to investigate in more depth. Yeah.
We've got the whole summer for that, right? Because they say we don't work during summer. Anyway, let's not go there. Good. The other question, and I thought this was a really interesting question, actually. We're talking about critical thinking. What I've noticed when I talk a lot with other teachers, there seems to be confusion about that word critical thinking. To me, it doesn't mean that you reject ideas or you're negative about the ideas. How would you describe critical thinking? I've got my own ideas, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think it's the problem, isn't it? With the word critical, it sounds negative. But of course, critical thinking, it really does mean that idea, as we said, about what makes you say that. It means basing your opinion on some sort of evidence, if you like, on some sort of reasoning, rather than simply having a gut reaction of sort of saying, I say the example of it's stupid. It's a bit like you're sort of reading something with a teenage student and they say, well, that's stupid. Okay. What makes you say it's stupid? Maybe you're right. Maybe it is stupid, but why do you think it's stupid? So yeah, critical thinking, I think, is basically backing up. Lots of people were saying in the chat box, justifying. Justifying is the real key word, isn't it? Critical thinking, maybe we could call it, thinking to justify your opinion. That's how I see it. I do also think, I had 2 jokes there about critical thinking, about how it is unsettling. And I think that's true. And one thing that I think it's important for us as teachers to remember, when we teach the present perfect, there's usually a right answer and a wrong answer. I think sometimes with critical thinking, there is no right or wrong answer. We have to be very careful not to impose our own opinion. When we say, is it a good idea that this happens? We have to listen to their opinion. And as long as we're getting them into the habit of creating their opinion, we could say, yeah, I see what you mean. I also think. But I think sometimes one of the dangers of teachers is that we say, yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong. And when we get to critical thinking, we've got, like I said before, many questions are not black, they're not white, they're very, very gray. And even some of the questions, I'm sure in my books, there are topics that, there is no right or wrong answer. But the question is, what do you think and why do you think that, And
it's really the ability as well to open students' eyes, right? That they can see it from one side, but also from another perspective.
Exactly. And that circle of viewpoints activity that I showed you quickly, that's also this idea is like, we need to learn to see things from different points of view, don't we? And I know that some people are often saying that adults, we're just as bad, and we are. I think that's why we're trying now in secondary education to get students to get used to the idea of questioning things. And and the answer is not always black or white. You know, somebody mentioned circuses. You know, I thought that was a great example. I love that example. Circuses and zoos. Yeah. I mean, there's are they good or are they bad? Well, that's a tricky question. That's a great question. But you know, most things in life are. You know, most questions are tricky.
Two sides to the coin, right? It's never really black or white. It really depends on where you stand in life. And I think, like you said, that's really important in our current society, that we develop understanding and that we might agree to disagree.
Absolutely. Actually, I've just seen a comment by David there about voting, and I never make political comments, but I think you're right about people have to question things. You know, we have to question things, and we have to find evidence for what we say. We can't simply say, you know, black is white, because if we say black is white, then we're going to get into a much more confusing world.
And that leads me actually then to the last question, because of course we've got our opinions as teachers, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as they're underpinned, justified with ideas. But it's very tempting sometimes for us to say that's wrong or that's right or better. So how do you avoid imposing your own opinion on your students?
I think that's a really good question. And I think it's like, I think if I'm going back to the very first session that I gave about classroom management, I think one little tip from me is that when students give an opinion on a question like this, count at least to 5 before you even say anything. Just literally wait, because somebody else might join in, somebody else might sort of agree or disagree with what the other person said, but give time, first of all, just for you to think, give time for other people to think, give time for other people to give their opinions. But I think that sometimes we jump in. I think it's very difficult as teachers. We're used to jumping in. We take control of the situation, and we lead the conversation where we want to go. I think you know, the really great teacher is the one who waits a second, think before you speak, and don't always then jump in with sort of like, well, you know, I know the right answer. You probably know the right answer for the present perfect, but sometimes it's also to give 5 seconds for somebody else to say, well, I think that's wrong because. So, you know, give other students the chance to chip in before you take control. And I will say that I think that is easier said than done.
Very true. I can only agree with you. I did it there. Oh, gosh. Elena is actually saying waiting time, and I think wait time is definitely one of those crucial aspects to deeper that thinking. One thing that reminds me of is a session years ago by Jim Scrivener, who said avoid rubber stamping.
Right.
But that's what we do very quickly, even in a reading exercise, when the student gives the answer true. Oh, yes, true.
I'm
there, we can probably stand back for a bit and see what others say, right?
Right, I'm going to give one little anecdote, okay? This is probably my last anecdote, but I once observed a class where a young male teacher had a class of about 10 middle-aged Spanish housewives, and the lesson was how to make a Russian salad. And they were doing this in English pretty well. And the teacher suddenly started saying, no, you're making it all wrong. You know, you don't use carrots or you don't use peas. And I'm thinking, like, what? First of all, you're practicing English, but like how, you know, respect your students. They know about things, you know, they know about, you know, they know this recipe. So if they use carrots, let them use carrots, you know, but the teacher took control. And as I say, we might be in control of the English, although even there we need to give thinking time, but we're not in control of everything. We don't know more than our teenage students about many things. They know many things more than we do, you know, in their lives. They probably know more about, I don't know, certain aspects of computers or video games than I do. So respect their knowledge, respect them.
And I think that's a lovely idea as well, because for us, we're in the business of learning. There's so much still to learn for us teachers from our students, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's at any age, I'm sure, even from primary school teachers, from primary school learners. But certainly with teenage students, we can learn a lot. And I think that students like teaching you things too.
Every day is a school day for me with my kids. There's always something new coming up. So lovely. Thank you, Dave, for answering all these questions and sharing all your ideas, and a wonderful webinar today. And of course, thank you for the other 2 webinars as well. That was a real pleasure.
It's been, well, it's my pleasure as always. I love doing these things because, I love the energy of all of you teachers. I mean, it's just amazing. When I am honestly, I'm sincerely inspired by all of your comments in the box. I see nearly everything, most things you write, and I really, I just would like you to know that I really do appreciate it. So thank you for sharing your time with me today and in the other 2 sessions.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for sharing all that love in the chat box and all your positive comments and all your positive feedback so far on the series, Teach with Dave Masterclasses. So I'm just going to wrap it up because it's 1:15. Some of us need to get back to marking, homework, whatever we need to do. So I just want to say again, if you joined us, you will also get a link later next week. It's not going to be tonight or tomorrow. In that link, you get the post-webinar pack, as you can see on the slide. There's a handout with some activities there for you. You'll be asked again, like we normally do, to reflect on what Dave spoke about in the session, how you can actually push yourself to that next level of teaching and implement some of these ideas. And in that handout, you also get all the addresses again of the websites that Dave was actually referring to. Then also there will be a podcast, maybe summarizing what we've talked about today, because I think we've got a lot of great ideas to talk about, Dave, in our podcast tomorrow. And also there will be a quiz that you can use with your students if you want to introduce them to these learning skills and life skills, and maybe something nice for the last week of school. Completely up to you. Amazing topic. So that's coming your way. And with that as well, there will be a link, there is, to your certificate. So please do check your email next week and that will all come to you. What else have I got to say? That this was our last Teach with Dave Masterclass for this school year. Because it's going to be summertime, we all need a bit of a break, like Dave already said, but obviously we're not going to say goodbye. There is something else we want to share with you, and that is that there will be a special professional development day organized for you, Teach with Dave and Nile. So Macmillan Education together with Nile has created Professional Development Day. We're not sure exactly when it's going to happen, but it's going to be a very practical day. Lots of interactive sessions with Dave and expert trainers from Nile. Once it's all organized, again, you will receive an email with all the details, and then you can sign up for that as well. Yeah, so look out and check those messages during summer as well, because it might be in there. Then if you want to keep following Dave and find out what he's up to, I think you know the drill. Facebook.com, Teach with Dave, but also you can follow us at Macmillan Education. So yeah, connect, stay in touch over summer. And I really think there's nothing else to say. It brings me to the end of this webinar. So let me say again, thank you to Dave for this amazing session.
My pleasure, my pleasure. And yeah, it's literally saying goodbye to the world now, isn't it? Because I've seen so many people from so many different countries. But yeah, I hope you will have a great summer break if you're about to have your break, and fill up with energy again for another year. I'm sure I'll see you in the next school year.
I'm sure we'll meet again in the next school year. And I'm going to say as well, thank you to all of you being so active in that chat box. And thank you for all your hard work in the classroom with all those teenagers. Enjoy your holidays if you're about to start them. If not, good luck with the final marking. And we hope to see you back very soon. And the last thing I want to say is thank you to Will, who is hiding behind the scenes today, collecting all these questions and supporting us. So thanks, Will, for being here. And thank you, Macmillan, for making this possible today. So thanks, everyone. Take care and see you soon. Have a lovely break. Thank you.